She walked into my living room like she already owned it. Designer bag on her arm, notary at her side, folder full of papers she expected me to sign without reading. My daughter-in-law had spent the better part of a year convincing my son I was losing my grip on reality. She had no idea I'd spent that same year building a wall she couldn't see. She thought she was coming to collect. She had no idea what was waiting on the other side of that door.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The first time Darius brought Simone to my house, I made a full Sunday spread. Baked chicken, candied yams, collard greens cooked low and slow with smoked turkey, cornbread from scratch, sweet tea in the good pitcher, the crystal one I got from my mother's house when she passed. I had been cooking since 6 in the morning. My feet hurt before noon. I did all of that because my son had told me 2 weeks before that he had found the woman he wanted to marry, and I believed him. So I cooked. My name is Loretta. I am 68 years old, and I have lived on this property outside of Lithonia, Georgia, my whole adult life. My late husband Raymond built our house on land that had been in his family since his grandfather. 5 acres around the house, and another 80-plus acres of timberland and cleared field that Raymond's uncle left to him in a will back in the 90s. Raymond left all of it to me when he passed, 7 years before any of this happened. I had never thought much about it other than to pay the taxes and let the property manager handle the timber lease. I didn't think about money. I thought about my son. Darius walked in first, grinning the way he used to grin as a boy when he wanted me to see something he was proud of. He was 41 years old and still had that same look. Right behind him was Simone. She was pretty in the way that costs money. Pressed linen blazer on a Sunday afternoon, heels on my porch. She shook my hand instead of hugging me, which I noticed but let go. We sat at the table and I served. Darius ate like he hadn't had a real meal in weeks, which, knowing his cooking, he probably hadn't. Simone took small portions and asked a lot of questions. And here is the thing I keep coming back to. The questions were not about me. They were not about Darius. They were about the property. Oh, how far out are you from the city? Is this whole area farmland? Is that timber out back yours? What does timber lease even mean? Do you just get a check? Do you own all of this outright, or is there a mortgage? She asked those questions in a light, curious voice, like she was just making conversation. Darius didn't notice a thing. He was eating cornbread and looking happy. I answered everything pleasantly. I didn't show her what I was thinking, but I was thinking plenty. After they left, I stood at the sink washing dishes and replaying every question she had asked. Not one of them was about my health. Not one was about what I liked to do or whether I was lonely or how I had been since Raymond died. Every single question pointed at the same thing. What do you have, and who controls it? I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself she was just curious. I told myself a woman can ask questions, but I kept washing those dishes long after they were clean. The wedding was in April. Simone had planned everything. I understood that was normal. I understood it was her day. I had asked early on if there was anything I could contribute, and she told me, in that smooth, patient way she had, that she and her mother had it handled, but that I was welcome to come to the rehearsal dinner. Welcome to come. To my son's rehearsal dinner. I wore the navy dress I bought special for the occasion. I sat at a table with Darius's college roommate and 2 of Simone's aunts who barely spoke English, which was fine, but nobody at the table knew Darius the way I did. Nobody at that table had held him through anything. At the church, I was in the 5th row. I want you to understand what that means. The 5th row. Behind Simone's co-workers. Behind people who had met my son twice. I had to lean sideways to see him at the altar. The mothers of Simone's bridesmaids were in the 3rd row. I had been Darius's mother his entire life, through a father who worked 2 jobs and still found time to coach Little League, through losing that father to a stroke when Darius was 34 and didn't know how to cry in front of anyone. I was there for all of it. The 5th row. I kept my face easy. I sang when it was time to sing. The reception was at a venue in Buckhead. all white linen and low lighting, and a DJ who played nothing I recognized. Simone introduced me to her guests as Darius's mom, said my name once, moved on. At the toast, her father spoke for 8 minutes. Her college roommate spoke for 5. Her maid of honor did a whole performance with a slideshow. When it came around to me, Simone caught my eye from across the room, smiled, and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "Oh, Miss Loretta, do you want to say a few words?" "A few words." I stood up. I had prepared something. I had written it down and practiced it in the bathroom mirror the night before. I got through the first 2 sentences. Then Simone started clapping. That light, decorative clap that means sit down. Everyone followed. I sat down. I finished my chicken. It was fine, a little dry. Around 10:30, I decided to leave. I found Darius near the bar and touched his arm. He hugged me fast and said, "Thanks for everything, Mom," and his eyes were already moving somewhere else before his arms let go. I was almost to the door when I heard Simone's voice behind me, talking to one of her friends. I wasn't meant to hear it, or maybe she didn't care. She said, "Good thing she lives out in the county. You know how mothers-in-law are, always hovering." Then she laughed. Her friends laughed. I kept walking. I got to my car and sat there in the parking deck for a while, not crying, just sitting. 38 years of motherhood, and I had just been managed out of my own son's wedding, like a guest who had overstayed. The drive home was long. I had the radio off. They went to Cancun for 2 weeks. I told myself that was fine. Newlyweds. I sent a text on their 3rd day. "Hope you two are having a beautiful time." Darius sent back a thumbs up. That was it. When they got back, I waited 4 days before calling. I didn't want to be the mother who hovers. I waited 4 days, and then I called, and Darius answered with the sound of a man who had been briefed on what to say. "Hey, Mom. Yeah, the trip was great. Simone's good. She says hello. We're just getting settled, unpacking and figuring out the house stuff. I'll call you this week." He did not call that week. I baked a pound cake and drove out to Decatur, where they had bought a house in a neighborhood I had never been to. I rang the bell. Simone answered the door in a silk robe at 11 in the morning, hair laid perfectly, like she had been expecting company she actually wanted. She looked at the pound cake the way you look at something someone left on your porch by mistake. "Oh, how sweet," she said. "Darius is on a work call, but I'll make sure he gets this." She took the cake. She did not invite me in. I stood on the step for a second, long enough to feel exactly what I was meant to feel. Then I smiled and said, "Of course, tell him I said hello," and I walked back to my car. I drove home on the highway with both hands on the wheel and the AC on full, and I did not pull over. I did not cry. I turned the situation over in my mind the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath. By the time I got home, I had stopped trying to explain it away. It was a Thursday morning in June, and I was on the porch with my coffee when Miss Claudette called. Miss Claudette has lived across the road from me for 31 years. She is 74, sharp as a tack, retired from the county assessor's office, and she does not call to chat. When Claudette calls, she has something to say. She said, "Loretta, are you planning on selling any of the back acreage?" I said, "No. Why?" She said, "Because a young man came by here Tuesday asking questions, said he was a real estate agent doing a market survey, asked about your land, asked who managed the timber lease, asked if I thought the owner might be looking to sell in the near future." She said, "He had a business card." I kept it. I asked her to read me the name on the card. She did. I did not recognize it. I asked what the young man looked like. She described him. I did not recognize him. I thanked her and hung up and sat with my coffee gone cold. Nobody had any business asking about my property. Nobody I had spoken to, hired, contacted, or given permission to, which meant someone else had sent him. I didn't jump to conclusions. I finished my coffee. I went inside. I pulled out the folder where I keep property documents and I read through them slowly, looking for anything I might have signed or agreed to that I didn't fully understand. I found nothing. That was not comforting. That meant whoever had sent that man was working from information I hadn't given them, which meant they had found it another way. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I called my friend Veronica. 2 days after Miss Claudette's call, I found a piece of certified mail in my box. My name was on the envelope. The return address was a company called Meridian Land Appraisal Services, out of Alpharetta. I had never heard of them. I had never contacted them. I opened it on the porch. It was a letter confirming an appraisal request for my property. The full parcel, house, cleared field, timber acreage, the whole thing. The letter named the requesting party. Simone Whitfield Carter. That was her full name. Darius's wife, my daughter-in-law. She had contacted a land appraisal firm and requested a valuation of property she did not own, had no legal interest in, and had never been given access to. She had done it quietly, on her own, without saying a word to me, or, I was fairly certain, to Darius. The letter said the appraisal had been scheduled pending my confirmation. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and took it inside. I did not call Darius. I did not call Simone. I sat with it for 1 full day. That night, I slept maybe 3 hours, not from panic, from the hard, settling clarity of knowing that what you feared was real. She wasn't fishing. She already had a line in the water. She had gone around me, around my son, and quietly started the machinery to price out what I had before she figured out how to take it. I got up before dawn, made coffee, called Veronica at 7:30. I said, "You need to come over. I need to show you something." Veronica pulled into my driveway at 9. We have been friends since our boys were in elementary school together. She worked as a paralegal for 22 years, family law and estates, before she retired. She is not an alarmist. She is also not someone who tells you what you want to hear. I showed her the letter. I told her about Miss Claudette's call. I told her about the appraisal agent who had come around asking questions. I told her about the mediator Simone had started mentioning in passing. A professional, she had called him. Someone who helps families have productive conversations about the future. Veronica read the letter. She read it again. Then she set it down on my kitchen table with both hands flat, the way you set something down when you need a second before you speak. She said, "Loretta, she's been working on this for a while." I said, "I know." She said, "The appraisal is only part of it. She needs to know what you have before she can figure out how to get you to sign it over. The agent, the appraiser, probably that mediator too. She's building a picture of your assets so she knows what the goal is." I said, "What do I do?" Veronica said, "First thing, don't show her what you know. Don't change your behavior. Don't warn Darius yet. If she finds out you're onto her, she'll adjust. Right now, your advantage is that she thinks you're just a grieving widow who lives out in the county and doesn't know the value of what she's sitting on." Then she said, "Second thing, you need a lawyer. Not a friend, not me. A real elder law attorney." "This week." I nodded. She said, "I know someone. He's good. He has seen this exact thing before, more times than you want to know." I drank my chamomile. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. I felt something settle in me that had been loose for weeks. Not calm exactly, but direction. I knew what I was doing next. Attorney Marcus Webb had an office on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree, and his waiting room had the good magazines and real wood furniture. He was 60-something, silver at the temples, wore a watch that wasn't flashy but was expensive. He had the manner of a man who has heard everything and is no longer surprised by any of it. He listened to me without interrupting. He asked a few questions. He read the appraisal letter. He looked at the property documents I had brought. Then he leaned back and said, "Mrs. Loretta, what you're describing follows a pattern I see regularly. It usually starts with isolation. pulling the older adult away from their established support system, making them feel like a burden. Then comes the assessment phase, which is what this appraisal represents. They're pricing the asset. Then comes the pressure campaign, suggestions about downsizing, assisted living, letting family help manage finances. And finally, if the target hasn't been warned and protected, there's the signing session. Usually with a friendly notary and a stack of papers designed to look like standard documents. He said, the goal is control of the asset. In your case, the land. I asked what he thought the land was worth. He pulled up some figures. I had never actually looked into it carefully. The timber lease alone had been running for years. The cleared acreage had value I didn't fully know. The property as a whole, with the house in the current market. He read me a number that made me sit up straight. He said, which is presumably why she's motivated. I said, what can we do? He said, several things. First, we set up an irrevocable trust that places the entire property out of reach of any informal transfer. Once it's in the trust, no one can pressure you into signing it away. There's no document to sign. Second, we document every contact they make that has to do with your finances, housing, or assets. Every call, every visit, every piece of mail. Third, you keep your phone close and recording. He said, and when they make their move, and they will, we'll be ready for it. I walked out of that building with Veronica, and for the first time in weeks, I stood up straight without thinking about it. About 3 weeks after I saw Marcus Webb, Darius called me on a Tuesday night. His voice was careful, the way it gets when he's saying something he has practiced. He said that he and Simone had been thinking about my long-term well-being, and they thought it might be good for all of us to sit down with someone neutral. A family consultant, he called him, a professional who helps families have honest conversations about the future. He said the man's name was Gerald Osei. He said Gerald specialized in working with older adults and their families. I said, that sounds thoughtful. I'd be happy to meet him. I said it like I meant it. The meeting was at Darius and Simone's house the following Saturday. Gerald was a tall man in his early 50s, well-dressed, warm handshake, very good at making eye contact. He had a practiced, low-key authority, the kind that makes you feel like you're in good hands before you've heard a word. He said his work was about helping families get ahead of difficult transitions. He said at a certain point in life, simplifying one's holdings could provide peace of mind and financial security. He said that holding on to large parcels of land could actually limit options rather than expand them, especially if the owner had limited capacity to manage the asset actively. He didn't push. He didn't rush. He was smooth. And I'll tell you the truth. For about 45 minutes, I had a moment of doubt. He made it sound so reasonable. He made it sound like maybe Darius and Simone actually were thinking about my well-being. Like maybe I had been reading malice into what was just clumsy, tone-deaf affection. I listened. I nodded. I said very little. Driving home, I turned it over. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Veronica and I built this into something it isn't. Maybe Simone is just a woman who doesn't know how to connect with people and genuinely doesn't mean harm. I thought that all the way home. Then I called Miss Claudette. I asked Miss Claudette if she still had that business card from the real estate agent who had come around asking about my property. She said she did. I asked her if she could find out anything about the man. She said she had contacts at the county from her years at the assessor's office, and she would see what she could find. She called me back the next morning. The agent worked for a company called Brightfield Property Solutions. Brightfield had purchased 4 separate properties in DeKalb and Rockdale counties over the past 3 years. All 4 sellers had been older adults, widows or widowers, living alone. All 4 sales had gone through quickly, below market value, through a third-party consultant who helped facilitate the transaction. The consultant's name on 2 of those sales, Gerald Osei. I sat down in the kitchen chair slowly. Miss Claudette said, "He's not neutral, Loretta. He's a salesman. I called Marcus Webb. I told him everything. I read him the details Miss Claudette had pulled. He said, "This confirms what I suspected. They're not winging this. Gerald scouts the property, gauges the owner, and softens the ground. Then the family comes in with the paperwork. It's a coordinated operation." I said, "Do they do this often?" He said, "Enough that the DA's Elder Fraud Unit has a file on a similar scheme. I've already been in contact with them about your situation as a precautionary measure. With your permission, I'd like to make it official." I said, "You have my permission." He said, "Good. Now here is what I need you to do. When they invite you to the next meeting, go. Act uncertain, act a little confused. Let them feel confident, and keep that recorder in your pocket." I hung up and stayed at the kitchen table for a long time. I looked at the photo of Raymond on the wall above the console, the one from our 25th anniversary, him in his good suit, me in the green dress. He had always said I was stronger than I knew. I was beginning to believe him. I called Darius and asked him to come to lunch. Just him, no Simone. I made pork chops, the smothered kind with the gravy he used to beg for as a teenager, rice, cornbread. I set the table properly with the linen placemats his grandmother had embroidered. He came. He ate. He relaxed a little once there was food in front of him, the way he always had. I watched him. He had that look he gets when something is sitting on him. He was too cheerful in the wrong moments and too quiet in others. He used phrases that didn't sound like him at a certain stage of life. Financial clarity. Simplify your holdings. Those were not Darius's words. Those were words someone had placed in his mouth and told him to repeat. I let him eat most of his plate before I said anything. I said, "Darius, I got a piece of mail a few weeks back that I've been meaning to ask you about." He looked up. I said, "It was from a land appraisal company, Meridian, up in Alpharetta. They said someone had requested an appraisal of my property." He said, "Oh?" I watched his face. He was not performing surprise. He actually didn't know. I said, "Did you request an appraisal on my land?" He said, "No. Why would I?" He stopped. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. He said, "Who requested it?" I said, "The letter listed a name. I'm not going to say who just yet. I just wanted to know if it was you." He set his fork down. He had that look on his face, the one he had at 14 when he finally understood something he had been refusing to understand. He said, "Mom," I said, "finish your food, baby. There's sweet potato pie for after." He looked at me for a moment, long and quiet. Then he picked his fork back up. We didn't talk about Simone again that afternoon, but something had shifted in the room. He knew that I knew something. He just didn't know yet how much. In the 2 weeks that followed, Simone called me every few days. The calls had a shape to them. She would ask how I was feeling, whether my hip was bothering me the way she had heard it was. And I don't know who told her that because I had never mentioned my hip to her once. She would mention things she had seen, articles about older women who had fallen alone in their homes, statistics about the challenges of maintaining large properties, a story she'd heard through a friend about a woman who had lost most of her savings because she didn't have the right financial protections in place. Each call was wrapped in warmth. Her voice was always gentle, always patient, always slightly sad in the way of someone who is carrying a burden. She texted me links. She sent a brochure, actual paper mail for a senior community in Conyers. "Beautiful facility," she wrote on a post-it stuck to the front. "Thought of you when I saw this." She wanted me afraid. She wanted me feeling fragile and alone and grateful that someone was thinking about me. I kept the recorder going. Marcus Webb had told me that documentation was everything. He said, "You already know what she's planning. What we need is evidence of how she's doing it." The pressure campaign, the financial questions, the suggestions about assisted living, all of that is part of the pattern. Every text she sends you, save it. Every call, record it. Let her build her own case against herself. I did exactly that. I answered her calls with a soft voice and a grateful tone. I asked her gentle, slightly confused follow-up questions that kept her talking. I thanked her for thinking of me. Inside, I was watching every word fall into the record like coins into a jar. On a Thursday morning, Simone called and invited me to dinner. She said she and Darius just wanted to spend time with me. She said she'd been thinking about how she wanted us to have a closer relationship, and she was sorry they hadn't been more attentive since the wedding. She said she was making shrimp pasta, which she remembered I liked. I had mentioned liking shrimp pasta once in passing at their wedding reception. She had filed that away. I called Veronica right after I hung up. Veronica said, "She's ready to move." I said, "I think so." Veronica said, "Don't go without being prepared." What does Webb say? I had already sent Webb a text. He called me back within the hour. He said, "Go. Be warm, be a little uncertain, let her feel in control. Wear the cardigan with the deep pocket on the right side. Recorder in that pocket, charged. Set to record before you walk in the door. Don't sign anything, no matter how routine it sounds. If a notary shows up, you tell them you need to review the documents with your attorney first." He said, "And Loretta, I'm going to be available by text the whole evening. You text me one word, 'ready,' and I'll make a call." I said, "Okay." I ironed my good blouse. I put on pearl earrings Raymond had given me for our 30th anniversary. I pressed the record button on my way up their front walk. The dinner was lovely on the surface. Simone was warm and attentive. The shrimp pasta was actually good. Darius poured wine and made jokes and looked like a man trying to have a normal evening by force of will. We talked about the neighborhood. We talked about Simone's job. We talked about the summer heat. Then, after she cleared the plates and brought out a fruit tart for dessert, Simone sat back down and placed a folder on the table. She opened it with the kind of casual motion designed to look unrehearsed. She said, "We actually wanted to talk to you about something tonight, Mama. Just a few things we've been thinking about." She called me Mama. She'd never called me that before in her life. And from the hallway, a man emerged, trim, quiet, carrying a leather case. He gave me a professional smile. Simone said, "This is Thomas. He's a notary. Just here to make things official." I looked at Thomas, the notary. I looked at the folder. I looked at my son, who was looking at the fruit tart. Then I looked at Simone and I said, in my best, soft, slightly bewildered voice, "Oh my, there's a lot of paper there." She smiled. She was comfortable. She thought she had me. I said, "Would you explain it to me? I'm not good with all this legal language." She said, "Of course. That's what we're here for." And she started explaining. I asked questions, slow questions, slightly confused questions. I made her go back and repeat things. I asked what certain words meant. I asked what would happen if I changed my mind later. I asked who would be in charge of the money if I wasn't. I asked whether the property would still have my name on it. Simone answered everything, patiently, thoroughly. Thomas the notary chimed in occasionally with practiced reassurances. Darius was quiet. Every answer went into the recorder in my cardigan pocket. The documents were exactly what Marcus Webb had predicted. The first was a limited power of attorney giving Darius and Simone authority over my financial accounts in the event I was deemed unable to manage them. The second was a consent form for placement in a licensed memory care and assisted living facility. A specific one, already named. The third was a property management transfer, which would move oversight of my land to a management company whose name I did not recognize. The fourth document, at the back, was the one that would have hurt the most if I had signed it. It was a property sale authorization. I asked about that one specifically. I said, "Is this selling my land?" Simone said, "It's just an authorization so that if the time ever comes and you can't manage the decision yourself, we can make sure it's handled properly for you." I said, "But someone else would be deciding to sell? Not me," she said. "We would be deciding, as your family, to protect you." I nodded slowly. I rubbed my temple like I had a headache. Then I sent Marcus Webb one word, "ready." 3 minutes passed. They felt long. Simone was talking about the memory care facility, telling me about the garden and the activities and how nice the staff was. Thomas was uncapping a pen. Darius was picking at his fruit tart. Then the doorbell rang. Simone looked up. Her expression shifted just slightly, just the smallest tightening around the eyes. Thomas said, "Are you expecting someone?" I said, "Just a neighbor, probably. Let me get it." I went to the door. Marcus Webb stood on the front step. Beside him was a woman in a dark jacket who introduced herself as a senior investigator with the DeKalb County District Attorney's Elder Exploitation Unit. Behind her was a man with a body camera already running. Webb said, "Good evening, Loretta. Are we on time?" I said, "Right on time. Come on in." We walked back into the dining room. Simone stood up. The color in her face shifted. Thomas the notary closed his leather case slowly. Darius looked at me. He looked at the investigator. He looked at Webb. He sat back down. Webb said, "Good evening, everyone. I'm Marcus Webb, Mrs. Loretta's attorney. My client has invited me to be present for this document signing. I'll be reviewing anything she's been asked to sign before she does so." He paused. "My colleague is a senior investigator from the DA's Elder Exploitation Unit, here in an observational capacity given the nature of the documents involved and some prior contact we've had with the office about this matter." Thomas said, There must be some misunderstanding. I only came to provide notary services." Webb said, "Then you won't mind if we review the documents before they're notarized." The investigator set up her camera facing the table. Thomas closed his case all the way. Webb picked up the folder. He read aloud from the power of attorney. He said, "And Gerald Osee, who was introduced to Mrs. Loretta as a neutral family mediator, has facilitated 4 property sales through Brightfield over the past 3 years, all involving elderly owners." He set Miss Claudette's written statement on the table beside the letter. Then he placed the voice recorder on the table and pressed play. Simone's voice filled the room, clear and patient and precise. The whole conversation, from the moment she had opened the folder to the moment the doorbell rang. Every explanation, every answer, every time she described what would happen to the money if Loretta couldn't manage decisions herself. Simone sat very still. Darius was not eating the fruit tart anymore. The investigator was recording everything. Webb said, "Mrs. Loretta also has documentation of a 2-month pattern of communications, calls, texts, and physical mail, consistent with a coordinated elder financial exploitation scheme. Given what's on this table, I've advised my client not to sign anything this evening. I've also advised her to preserve all documentation for any proceeding the DA's office may pursue." He turned to Thomas the notary and said pleasantly, "I'd like the name of the firm that engaged you for this appointment." Thomas picked up his case and said he needed to make a call first. He walked toward the hallway. The investigator told him gently that she would need him to stay. Simone tried once more. She said, "This is completely overblown. We were trying to help her. We were worried about her living alone out there, and—" Darius said, "Simone." One word, flat. She stopped. He looked at the appraisal letter. He looked at it for a long time. He touched the edge of it with one finger like he was making sure it was real. He said, "You put her name in as the requesting party." Simone said, "I was trying to get a sense of—" He said, "You went to her property. You called a company and had them appraise her land, without telling me, without telling her." She said, "Darius, I was—" He said, "Did you hire Gerald?" Silence. He said, "Simone." She looked at the table. She said, "I was trying to protect you. The property is a liability if she can't manage it. I was thinking about our future." He said, "Our future." And something in his face settled. Not anger, exactly. More like a door closing. He looked at me. And this is the moment I have turned over and over since that night. My son looked at me across that table with all those papers between us, and I saw him come back. Not all the way, but enough. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder on long drives. The man who had called me crying the night his father died. He was in there, behind everything Simone had spent a year building up around him. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." He said it quietly. He said it to me. I nodded. That was enough for now. Webb wrapped things up efficiently. The investigator collected copies of all documents. Thomas gave his information before he left, looking like a man who was already regretting the choices that had led him to that dining room table. Simone went upstairs without saying goodbye to me. Darius walked me to my car. He said, "I'll call you." I know that doesn't... I'll call you. I said, "Okay." He hugged me. This time it was real. I drove home on the highway with the windows down. It was a warm night. I turned on the gospel station and let it play without paying attention to the words. Veronica was waiting on my porch when I got home. She had a thermos of decaf and 2 cups. She had a key to my house and let herself in sometimes. I had never been more grateful for that than I was that night. We sat on the porch and didn't say much at first. Eventually she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. I said, "Tired." "Correct." She poured the coffee. I said, "I kept hoping I was wrong the whole time. Even tonight, part of me kept hoping I'd misread it." Veronica said, "I know." I said, "She sat at my table. She called me Mama." Veronica didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. We sat there until almost midnight. I ate half a piece of pound cake I'd made 2 days before. My hands had stopped shaking around 11. When she left, I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet. I looked at Raymond's photo. I said, to nobody in particular, "You were right about the property, and you were right about me." Then I went to bed, and for the first time in months, I slept until morning. The call started 2 days later. First, Simone. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that started with, "I think there's been a misunderstanding," and trailed off into something I didn't finish listening to. Second call 2 days after that. I let that one go too. Marcus Webb called to tell me that Thomas's notary license had been flagged for review pending investigation by the state licensing board. Gerald Ossie had received a letter from the DA's office informing him he was a named party in an elder financial exploitation inquiry covering multiple properties in the metro area. Brightfield Property Solutions was under a separate review. Miss Claudette brought over sweet potato pie on a Wednesday. She sat at my kitchen table and I told her everything, and she listened with that straight-backed, unimpressed expression she has. And when I finished, she said, "Good." And then she ate 2 pieces of pie. My church community found out quietly, the way things travel at church. My pastor's wife called to check on me. 2 women from the senior ministry left casseroles on my porch. One of them, a woman named Dorothy who had been in my Sunday school class for 20 years, called and said, "Loretta, the same thing almost happened to my sister up in Augusta." "Who is your attorney? I'd like to pass his name along." That was how it started. Darius did not call for 4 days. I did not reach out either. On the 5th day, he called. He sounded like himself. He came on a Saturday. I made nothing special. I put on a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and let him come in and find his own place to sit. He tried to apologize right away. It came out sideways. He said things like, "I don't know how I let it get to this point, and I thought she just had a strong personality, and I should have been paying attention." None of it was quite right, but I could hear that he meant it. I let him talk. Then I said, "Darius, I need you to understand something. This was not about Simone outmaneuvering you. She did. But the part that hurt, the part I am still working through, is that you let me become invisible for a year and didn't notice." He looked at the table. I said, "The wedding, the seating." Walking me to my car and not dancing with me. The first weeks of silence. The visit where she took the pound cake and closed the door. You were there for all of it. You watched it happen. He said, "I know." I said, "I need you to sit with that, not apologize over it. Sit with it." He nodded. We were quiet for a while. Then he said, "She told me you were difficult. She said you had a pattern of inserting yourself into our relationship. She said—" He stopped. He said, "I believed her because it was easier than not believing her." That was the most honest thing he had said. I poured him more coffee. I said, "I know who you are, baby. I raised you. You are not a bad man. But you made choices, and choices have weight. And now we're going to have to be patient with each other while we figure out what comes next." He said, "Are we okay?" I said, "We are working toward okay." He said, "That's fair." We sat there another hour. We talked about Raymond. We talked about a trip we had taken when Darius was 9, to the Smoky Mountains, the broken-down van, the little motel with the ice machine outside the room. We laughed about that for a while. When he left, he hugged me in the doorway and held on a second longer than usual. I did not tell him it was going to be fine. It would be fine. But that wasn't mine to promise. That was his to earn. The land is in an irrevocable trust now, managed through Marcus Webb's firm. I signed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning in his office on the 14th floor with Veronica there, and Miss Claudette, who came downtown on the bus because she wanted to see it done with her own eyes. Webb handed me a pen, and I signed my name, and then I sat there for a second with my hands in my lap and felt something I couldn't name right away. Relief doesn't quite cover it. It was more like setting down something heavy you had been carrying so long you forgot it was in your hands. Simone and Darius separated 6 weeks after that dinner. I don't know all the details, Darius told me briefly over the phone. He sounded tired but clear. I didn't ask for more than he offered. Dorothy from Sunday school introduced me to a woman named Patricia, who runs an informal network through 3 local churches for older women dealing with financial pressure from family members. Patricia had been fighting her own version of this battle for years. She asked if I would come speak to the group sometime. The first time I went, there were 11 women in the room. I told my story. When I got to the part about the appraisal letter, about seeing Simone's name printed there in black ink, neat as anything, 2 women started crying. Not from sadness, exactly, from recognition. I have been back every month since. Miss Claudette comes over on Thursday evenings now. We eat on the porch and watch the light change over the back acreage, all that old timber standing the way it has for decades, not going anywhere. Veronica is talking about retiring and moving down from Decatur. There's a house 2 roads over from me that's been sitting empty. We've driven by it twice. Darius comes on Sunday sometimes. He sits at the table and eats, and we talk about regular things. We are building something back, slowly. It will not look like what it was. It doesn't need to. It just needs to be real. Every morning I make coffee and carry it out to the porch and stand there in the early quiet before the day gets going. I look at the trees at the edge of the property line and the sky starting to come in over them and the dew on the grass, and I think about Raymond telling me at the end, "You are stronger than you know, Loretta. You have more than you think." He was right. I just needed long enough without someone else's noise in my ear to finally hear him. My name is Loretta. I am 68 years old. I own 87 acres outright, and I know every inch of them, and I am not going anywhere. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.